Welcome back to another segment of Real Talk with the experienced real estate partners that are sitting right here. So today we have a few things to discuss since the last time we sat down together. Some of the big news is that the National Association of Realtors obviously had a settlement about a month and a half ago, agreeing to certain mandates that are supposed to go into effect in July. It was conditioned upon the court approval. We did hear last week that Judge Boo did approve the settlement suggested mandates, and that is expected to go into place sometime, I think there's a hearing on it in November, but the changes are supposed to take place mid-July. So there's been a lot of questions still circling. I think even as agents, there's still some questions. We've been sitting here chatting about it before the camera started. So we just wanted to kind of put our conversations, even amongst ourselves, just out there for the consumer to maybe learn and develop some questions of yourselves. So I'd like everybody to introduce themselves real quick. Shout your name out.
Melanie Kramer.
Angela Algani.
Lauren Swoboda.
Kathy Helbig.
Laurie Soleanea.
Tamara Hill.
And Curtis Blackford.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into I think the biggest changes that we're trying to comprehend as an industry is that, number one, and some misinformation, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Number one is that can sellers no longer offer to pay compensation to buyer's agents? I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions that we're seeing with clickbait, with headlines, just the general consensus of what changed about real estate commissions. That seems to be what people are hearing. Oh, I hear we can't pay agents commissions anymore. And that is absolutely not true. There was also information released by, I believe it was the New York Times, saying that finally real estate commissions are negotiable. They've always been negotiable, so that was incorrect as well, right? We all know that, right? So I think let's just jump into what is everyone's understanding of, if you're talking with a seller right now, and the seller says, I heard I don't have to pay commissions anymore. I hear I can't pay commissions. Those two different things. I can't pay commissions anymore, or I don't have to pay commissions anymore. Has anybody had those conversations start to happen yet?
I've had them with buyers more.
Mm-hmm.
Buyers just saying, I guess more or less asking, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
And you start explaining the process, and then they just say, well, I don't want to be nailed down to just one buyer's agent, because I want to utilize every agent's resources. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I get all the right information in that sense without saying the things I'm not supposed to say?
Yeah. So we'll talk about that, because that's a whole other topic. And that's top of the list on that one. What about anybody have an experience with a seller asking questions?
So on the listing side, my last two have asked, am I not allowed to give compensation? They were afraid that they could not compensate to entice people to come in.
So their interpretation of headlines is that they can't do it anymore.
They were afraid that they could not.
That's not true, right? Have you had a conversation, Tamara?
I have. I had a listing appointment with two clients that are getting ready to list their house, and they asked about it as well and said, well, if we don't offer a buyer's agency commission, it probably means our house is going to get less showings.
Okay.
And which this could be very true.
So they'd obviously heard some of the rumblings themselves, and then came to their own conclusion that they feel like the traditional model, for anybody that's never sold a house before, was typically the seller hires the listing broker shares that commission with cooperating agents out there's broker, and it's divided up at closing. So that has always in the past been considered a way to engage more agents to show the property so that you have better success. So this seller brought that conversation up to you. You didn't even have to bring it up, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they feel like the traditional route is still the way they want to go, which hopefully explain that they can, but you can.
Yes.
What about you? If you had anybody?
I've had a few listing appointments. Most of them have expressed that they have heard about something going on, but they're not exactly sure what it is. My listing appointments were 2 working parents, busy households.
Yes.
So it's sort of on their radar because they're getting ready to sell their house, but they're not quite sure how to handle it. So it was more of an education of, here are the current options, here are the options post 724, and here are the pros and cons to each of those options, was the conversation.
Okay, good. And I've had some agents reach out to me personally saying that they are, having those conversations with sellers. So it is starting to take place. And I've also talked to agents and brokers that are in other parts of the country that already has gone down this road with their MLSs within the last couple of years. And they stated that they didn't see much change in their market. And so we're starting to hear that. One of the articles I was reading this morning was saying they think that, sure, there are going to be some sellers that try to go that route, potentially if they don't get the success that they were hoping to get, that they'll come back with going back to, maybe some of the traditional ways of offering. The biggest change, because we're saying, well, what's changed if sellers can still do this, right? The change is that it can no longer be advertised in the MLS what the payout is. So as a buyer or a buyer agent, let me roll it back. As a listing agent, I had the ability to say, I'm going to make one unilateral offer. That means one-sided. It's not open for negotiations. So the MLS and their rules said that we needed to cooperate with each other and agree to some sort of compensation, even if it was just $1. That's what has changed. We do not have to compensate anymore. We don't have to. We used to have to at least do as a penny or $1 or something like that. So that rule has changed. So you can say, no, I'm not going to offer anything. And it's no longer guaranteed by that little field in the MLS, which was our contract for payment. Rather, we had a contract with a consumer that was using us as a buyer or not. If that consumer had us go show them the house and wanted us to write an offer, we had that contractual agreement from that little field in the MLS from that listing broker that would compensate us. So what's happened is that has allowed a free-for-all all these years for buyers to not commit to a particular agent. They bounce around and go see houses all day long because, let's face it, the agent's going to get paid regardless. So the agents that didn't want to have those conversations, sit down and try to discuss their value proposition and get a commitment, which, let's be real, that can be hard when you're one of the ones that are going by the rules. And because in Missouri, we've been proclaiming buyer agency is the best way to operate with a consumer since, I'm going to say 1999 or 98, something like that, maybe 96. So it's been suggested, but it wasn't ever required. Okay. So when you don't require something, it's very easy to skip those conversations with a consumer that maybe just called you off the sign or saw your listing on Zillow and you end up getting connected. Like, you don't have a relationship built yet. So to say, hey, I'm going to send you a buyer agency agreement and nobody else is doing that, or the majority of people are doing that, it became challenging for the agent to gain those commitments. And the buyers were kind of like, why would I sign with you? And I can go somebody's going to show me the house down the street. That's changing. And that's really hard for the customer to comprehend. So that's kind of going back to what you were saying, that you've had recent conversations with buyers that don't understand why they would need to commit. They still think the way to go is, hey, I'm going to call 20 different agents and whoever finds me the house, I'll use. Right. So does anybody want to touch on how that's changing since I'm talking so much?
Well, it's sort of always been an educational process. Buyers buy every 5 to 7 years. So it's been the marketing conversation, what we're going to do to market their house, what they need to get their house ready. the same traditional things. Now there's this other wrinkle that's in there because they don't know, they've heard. I mean, there's agents in our industry that are confused. So of course our clients, our potential clients, are confused about this, and it's a whole new educational process for them.
Right. And then going back to my unilateral piece, I kind of got off track there on that. The unilateral offer and the MLS was our contract before. Now that they're taking that away, so now that the law says they cannot do that anymore, that is unfair and claiming price fixing, that now we have to establish our guarantee of a payment to do work directly with our consumer. So we can't.
It's the same on the sales side, so it should be.
It's just like on the listing side.
Right.
The problem is y'all out there have gotten used to not having to commit to anybody. So that's like saying, hey, I want you to sell my house. I want to sell my house. Come over and take a look at it. And I don't want to sign any agreement with you. I don't want to sign a listing agreement. I'm going to tell a bunch of agents to come over and look at my house. And then you can all take photographs and pay for drones and spend your time writing up marketing remarks and pay for brochures. And then whoever finds the buyer gets it. That's not how we sell houses, right? That would be really risky of our time to do that. Now, there are areas out there that do open agencies, open listings like that. It's just very, very uncommon because it is taking a huge risk for somebody to put their time and money into it. It's the same thing on the buyer side, but the problem is we haven't operated this way. So it is going to be like, to the consumer, be like, say, what?
Excellent.
Who is they telling me that I have to sign some sort of agreement to look at a house? Like, it sounds crazy to them, right? But it is no different than you're hiring an agent to sell your house. You're hiring an agent to help you buy a house. It's not going to be the same. So the quicker that we can get that word out and understanding out that it is the new normal, the better we hope the customer will feel about it, because there are a lot of advantages to committing to one agent. Right? Any more on that piece?
I think that what the buyers probably are going to have to understand the most is that they need to find that agent who's really going to work through everything with them, because things are going to be extremely transparent, just like they always have. But there's a little more question mark about, is their commission when they purchase this house, is their agent's commission going to be paid by the seller, or is it going to be paid by the buyer? If the buyer is having, it's hard to come up with down payments, right?
Yes.
And it's could potentially be really difficult to come up with an agent's commission as well. So on top of that down payment, you're now having to come out of pocket, potentially, maybe, depending on what the seller is offering. You're going to have to come out of pocket with the salary or the commission that you are paying your agent now. So I think that's the big thing. And we won't know this house that's coming soon. We're going to have to go through one by one and figure out what concessions they're offering you or not. And so it is really going to be even more work than it was before for your agent to go out and comb through the listings and see which ones you can afford. So I think is the scariest part to buyers right now, is what they're going to have to come to the table with for closing on this house.
Speaks to, choosing who your agent's going to be right away up front. Because like you said, that is a bit of legwork. And, this all, as a mortgage lender, this all makes sense to me because, again, the listing, you've always done it on the listing side. So really, why wouldn't you do it on the buyer's side as well? It's almost like it just got turned on its side just because you had never done it this way, but maybe it should have always been this way. And you're talking about the time and the legwork. We feel that in a lot of industries, including lending. What what industry are you going to go and have a professional work up something like this for you for hours, or take you to see homes for hours, or
months,
or
years,
or years, or do
Queen of years over here.
or do pre-qualifications, or do pre-approvals, things like that on the lending side, talking to you about different properties, maybe for months or even a year. Melanie and I just had a closing this morning where, you know, I was working with him for almost a year, and you were working with him for a long time. You have a closing coming up where you were working with someone for 4 years. 4 years.
So imagine working for 4 years without one cent.
So to have a buyer agency agreement, it really does make sense if people could just dig into their hearts and think, what other job are you having people do for free for this amount?
Right, right. Exactly.
And it is going to be about finding that agent that is committed to you and understand. It's in the end, it's not just about the purchase price. I really try to put an exclamation point at the end of that, because it has a lot to do with, okay, now we're under contract. What do we do? So you need an agent who's solid with negotiations after that purchase negotiation has occurred, getting through all of your terms and making sure that the terms are set up correctly. I believe that it's that's when the real value of a strong agent comes into play, is after you locked that contract down. And working through any contingencies that might be on there. So you really, just like sellers interview, or I think should interview a few agents, as a buyer, you want to interview a few agents to represent you, and you want to go with one that has a very strong negotiation skill set.
Yes. So wrapping up my unilateral piece, because I want to jump back on something you said here too. What's changed is that before it was a unilateral offer to pay, advertised in the MLS, we knew up front whether our buyers paying or the sellers pay, we're getting paid X amount, so we're covered. That is now gone, and the unilateral part is gone. So what that means is now it can be negotiated. So we used to not be able to do that. We could not negotiate commissions on the offer. It was a separate thing. The MLS was our negotiate. It wasn't negotiate. It was a unilateral. It was our offer to pay and our contract to pay. Now it's open for negotiation. So even if a seller is electing up front to not offer a compensation payout, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get an offer that still has that compensation payout negotiated in. Because if that buyer then feels like, all right, I'm running across a property that they're not going to pay my agent, so now that means I have to pay the agent, that might change their offer. It likely will. So that is a misnomer about the offers to pay. It doesn't mean it's going away. It just means it's not required, and it's not advertising more. And it's only not advertised on the MLS. The agents can advertise it on their own websites, just their own listings, but they can advertise it in other channels besides the MLS. So, and now I forget what I was going to come back and say to you, but it'll come back to me.
It'll come back.
So that's one big change. And then I printed off like the frequently asked questions with NAR about compensation. So I want to make sure I say everything just right. Sellers can offer buyer concessions now in lieu of a commission. So that can be advertised in the MLS. So what that means is, before, when it used to be really hard to sell a property, you would often see seller to offer, pay buyers closing costs, prepaids and points, $5,000 credit towards concession towards that. And then you didn't see that for a long time because the market was so hot. But that is another way that you can, as a seller, instead of having a compensation offer for an agent, you can have a compensation offer for the buyer. And that can still be listed in the MLS. So, and then there was I was talking with Lauren, again, she's with New American Funding, Lending, and there was some, hot news that broke about 2 weeks ago, supposedly breaking news. Fannie and Freddie are going to allow interested party concessions or contributions, IPCs, to now not include the commission, the buyer's agent commission. And that was a little bit
confusing.
Not breaking news, because it's always been that way. It's just never really been talked about much or really clarified.
Right.
Because we've never had to really ask the
Yeah.
questions. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's just interested party contributions. So it's people that are sort of a part of the transaction and how much they can contribute to that bottom line. So whether it's the seller giving concessions or a builder or something like that, giving some sort of money towards the transaction. Nothing has really changed on that end. So depending on whether it's a Fannie Freddie conventional loan or an FHA loan, VA, they all have always had just a percentage that they will allow for those kinds of things.
The maximum.
A maximum.
So does that change? If we put on there, seller's going to offer a certain amount of concession, how does it affect?
You just can't go over a certain percentage depending on.
How's that going to work if it's already, you pre-negotiated this amount with your buyer?
Then the buyer would pay the difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're getting a chunk off of your bottom line, but it might not cover all of it. And these types of things,
And really, if it's a concession anyway, that's for the buyer. It has nothing to do with the commission. Basically, what that means is you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right.
So you're saying instead of coming out of, in normal circumstances, buyers have gotten used to paying their own closing cost.
Right.
In most cases.
Right.
So now this is a way to go, hey, let's just do this little shell game here of let me pay for your expenses that I'm allowed to pay for, and then you cover your commission. So if it's close, then it's kind of a wash.
Right.
It might not be 100% a wash. So then you still might be coming out a little more for commissions. And if it was a type of loan that only allowed 3% maximum versus 6% maximum or 4% maximum. So it's just a way of like helping the buyers feel like they're not getting all of it piled on top of them. Does that make sense?
They can't put it, those kinds of concessions, typically they still have to bring their own down payment. Borrowers have to still cover their own. There's usually a certain percentage that they still have to bring to the table as part of the loan, you have to bring a certain percentage for down payment.
So, that just goes back to buyer's consultation,
100%.
talking about, hey, not only do you have to save money for the down payment, start thinking about saving money to pay your buyer's agent.
Correct.
Potentially.
Because
Just get it in their head so they get used to that anyway.
But even more so why to bring the lender into the conversation, because the lender is going to be more privy to what exactly they
You've
have.
got to gather your team.
It's a team.
It's a team.
It's a team. Yeah.
So it's your agent, your lender, which is why we partner with somebody that we do most of our value with so that it's really dialed in.
Right.
So that's important. And to take the time. Don't be frivolous about the biggest expense of your life and just pick up the phone and call whoever. And then, here's, let's make this offer. You need to prioritize to come in and sit down and have these long conversations. Because it's a lot. It's a lot of information for you to hear, for you to comprehend. And unfortunately, we're in a fast moving market still. Fortunately to some, we're in a fast moving market. So when the time comes that you find a house and you want to sit down and write an offer, we probably don't have the time to start at ground zero right then, right? To then explain all of this stuff and write the offer and go over the offer and get it into 100%. The agent in time before somebody else has bought the house that you want to buy. So please, if you get nothing else out of this, take the time to prioritize buying a house. Don't be put off when your agent says, let's have a meeting. Let's set up a time to sit down and let me have a consultation with you so that I can learn from you what is most important to you and what your needs are for a house. And you can learn from me what all it's going to take to get you that house. Okay, because that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you. And then in the process, we'll establish what our fees are for that. And then we make
and also get pre-qualified during that conversation too. You don't want to throw in getting pre-qualified right when you're trying to make an offer and you haven't spoken to a lender.
No, because a lot of times there's so many things involved, and mortgages change so much. They've adapted to what's happened in this market, and there's all kinds of new creative ways to do things that you might not even realize. So that's why that sit down, that exploratory meeting is so important. Because you might be thinking we got to go this direction, and then just from sitting down with you for an hour or two, we find out we've got these other avenues for you to go to.
Right.
So it's really important.
One other side note too, on the listing presentations, when I go and talk to somebody who wants to sell their house and we're having the conversation about what's coming down the pipeline this summer, one of the things that I stress to them is if their choice, and it's obviously their option, if their choice is to not offer any concession whatsoever to the buyer,
Right.
and the buyer then has to come out of pocket, the buyer, well, I then have to consider another piece of the puzzle for pricing their home, because the comps that recently sold will have that commission baked into those sales.
Right.
So now we kind of have to think, now it depends on the house and the condition and a lot of other things when it comes to pricing. But this is another piece of the pricing puzzle where, yes, the 10 comps that I just showed you were this amount. But if you want to list your house with no concessions, then that's going to be considered from a purchasing standpoint. The buyer is going to know that these other comps had the commission baked in or the concession baked in, and this house currently does not. So how does that affect your entry price if you're listing?
It's almost like for sale by owner, they expect a discount.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's a lot of moving parts right now.
And the devil's advocate to that is the buyer is still paying because they're paying in the price of the house.
Mhm.
There's other sides of the fence that say that's not true. The house would sell for that price no matter what. So that's a tough argument. You can make an argument for both sides, but I do think you're right. That is going to there's going to be conversations coming up about that for sure, that we have to
There'll be another.
see how it's going to shake out. So back to consultations and back to what's really changing the most for buyers. And that is, you have to understand that it is now mandated that in order to go see a property, a buyer, this is directly from National Association of Realtors, written agreements for MLS participants acting for buyers. We have agreed to require MLS participants working with buyers to enter into written agreements with their buyers before touring a home. This change will go into effect late July. So you have to, if you're picking up the phone and you call one of us to see a house, we have to enter into some sort of a written agreement, and there has to be the conversation and agreement as to compensation and fees in that agreement. Now, that doesn't mean there are not going to be different variations of agreements. So I think that's going to be really hard at first for people to comprehend, because we were laughing really like, who is they saying that I have to sign something legally binding with somebody if I want to go see a house. But we are mandated as realtors, and we have a code of ethics, and we have to follow the rules that are required by our state licensing. And that rule is we are not allowed to show property without entering into agreement effective July.
I feel like our
Period.
group has got a good head start on it, even if it's a specific house on a specific day.
Correct.
Compensation, it doesn't have to be for a long period of time.
Right. So talk about that. Why don't you guys to talk
that's a
about what are
strategy,
some examples of entering into agreement and establishing fees. Anybody want to jump on that?
So I did somewhat recently a property.
Without saying a number.
A property. And so I was meeting somebody cold there. It was set up. It was a Sunday afternoon. Nobody in our group wanted to do it. So it was a $1.1 million.
Boom! Under the bus. Boom, boom.
So it was a $1.1 million house, and I wrote the contract up for that specific address.
Yeah.
For that specific price. They were offering a
1.5.
specific
I would have jumped on.
Right.
What are you talking about?
1.15.
I
And
remember
then
this one.
and then it already had listed a specific percentage payout. So I put that specific percentage payout in the buyer's agency agreement just for that specific day, and we got the deal and we closed on it. So
Nice deal.
very nice deal.
Yeah.
So,
So-
what do we do when there isn't? Like, I'm
Right.
still trying to figure out. Okay, because we can't use a sliding scale, I guess, with
Mhm.
the concession. What do we write in there now?
Well, we
I
have
don't
to
wanna
write
get
in there
You know,
what is our minimum agreed upon fee. It can be flat fee. It can be a percentage. It can be,
Is it minimum? I thought it was maximum.
well,
And
your
can it be
minimum
amended?
with them, which is your maximum that you can receive elsewhere. So
Right.
you're telling your buyer, here's my rate between me and you. Okay. So that our minds are having to flip backwards, because before what we used to write is, oh, we'll just put 0 in there just in case, so you don't worry about it, because there's this compensation to be paid by the seller. Well, with that gone, there's no guarantee of that compensation to pay. Now, instead of saying, don't worry about it, we'll take whatever the seller's going to offer, we cannot receive, we are mandated to no longer be able to receive anything that's above what is in that field. So if somebody is offering X commission that is here on the number scale, we can't say commission amounts, but the seller's offering Y commission that's up here, we can only collect X. So obviously, it's in the best interest of buyer agents to not start in the bargain basement, because then they're cutting themselves short when there is a seller that is willing to offer compensation. We can't change it to go up. You can change it to go down. Funny how that works.
So we can't amend
Oh,
it.
you can.
Yes.
That was my question.
Okay.
'Cause
Okay.
what
That was
we
my
could just
question.
put in there,
You
say.
can. You don't have to, because it is an employment agreement
Right.
with your consumer. But if there is a situation where you want it to reduce, you can.
Okay.
You can't go up and go, oh, we were only getting X on our buyer agent, but this seller is offering Y. Woohoo! Let's raise it. You can't do that.
That's what
So
I'm
it's
saying.
Can you write it into your agreement at the beginning? You can put your
Is whatever seller's willing to pay.
whatever the range is,
Nope.
that you're willing
That's
to.
where we
Nope.
started
Can't be a
say,
sliding scale.
Okay.
you
Yeah.
can't say numbers.
Yeah, it's got to be an established. I would, yeah.
Okay, so what can I say? Percentage?
Nope.
Okay, so
X and Y.
okay,
Lower, higher, higher,
okay,
lower.
higher X,
X.
and just
Okay.
leave it at that. And then we'll just, we explain to the buyers, if there's a seller that is offering the higher X, we'll do that. But if it
You
comes
can't go
down
higher.
to it, we can't go higher. No, I'm just saying it's the same as I put in there.
Okay.
You can't.
And then if it turns out we don't find them a house that a seller's not offering a commission, and then it goes back to the buyer.
Or here's a better idea, because we weren't, this is where we've got to change our thinking too, guys. We were never allowed to negotiate commissions before with the listing agent or the seller.
Right.
Mhm.
We had to take what we were given,
Right.
right? We don't have to do that anymore. So that's this whole new wrinkle in this, is we go, hey, seller's only offering Y and buyer agent says X on our agreement. So to try to help our buyer to not have to come out of pocket rather than renegotiating all the time, because now you're constantly, you still don't know what you're making if you have to renegotiate. Now you're going, okay, and what we're going to do, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is if we run into a situation like that where there is compensation being offered, but maybe it's not to the amount of what you and I are agreeing that I'm going to be charging for my services, then we can always try to, in our offer, bump that commission to cover your commitment so that you're not coming out of pocket. Can't guarantee that they'll do it.
I mean, bump the concession.
If you can negotiate a commission now.
Oh,
So even if the seller's not offering a commission, you can say, I want a 2, 3, 4, whatever percent
Would you be
commission.
willing? Yeah.
Here's the offer. Here's the price. Here's the closing date. Here's my commission rate. Here's the da-da-da-da-da. That can now go into the negotiations. We were not allowed to
Even
before.
whatever we have X in the
On the
buyer's
contract,
agency.
right.
That's interesting.
But
And
what
then-
you can't do is if they come back and go, we'll even pay you Z if you buy this house, and you only have X on your buyer agency agreement, you then cannot collect
Above.
the
You can't
windfall.
amend it either.
You
You
can't.
You can only amend
above.
Down.
You can only amend down.
Supposedly, you could only amend down. Now, I think we're going to get some more clarity around that soon. There hasn't been a lot of answers to that part, but to me, I think a contract's a contract. You can amend a contract all the way up until.
So I have a question. So then in that contract, I cannot write X% of your purchase price?
Yes.
I can't. So I
Yes.
could still say
Yes.
my buyer's commission,
Correct.
agent commission is X% of your purchase price.
Yes,
But we don't know what your purchase price is yet.
correct.
So now we go look at 10
Which is
homes,
what it's always
and
been.
then, right,
That's
I
what
know,
it's
and then
always
now I find the home,
Right.
and this home costs X.
Right.
Y.
But here's the
But
difference.
I already put in that I said I wanted
Right.
X%.
Which we do that. We
slightly
run
Right.
that as a company, as a group.
Right.
We've kind of already followed the buyer agency
Right.
rules and regs
Right.
for the most part, and we put in what we think is our minimum commission. But the
Right.
difference is, I'm going to say not even 99.9, 100% of listed properties. Now, FSBOs are different.
Mhm.
100% of listed properties had a compensation built in for us. So it was an easier conversation. Be like, don't sweat it. We're going to put this on the contract, but somebody else is likely paying for it, right? Now we got to have the conversation of, here's the deal. We could run into a situation where someone is not offering to pay
Mhm.
my compensation. So in that case, you're paying this.
Mhm.
And we're going to do everything we can to try to get that covered and minimize your out of pocket. But in the event that we can't, you're responsible for X.
Mhm.
That's the conversation. And like I said, consumers get used to the idea that we are not going to be able to just drop everything and run without having these sit down conversations. And at least we can. For instance, there's a lot of people that are on lead calls and things like that. There will still be ways to accommodate that. It will be a quick one pager. Here's an agreement. I'm happy to show this house to you. I'm sending you over a buyer agency agreement right now. You can choose how you want me to represent you. And here's what I'm charging for my service for today. It can be for that one property. It can be for the day. It can be whatever. And then once you establish a relationship with us, maybe more than a phone call, and you feel a little more comfortable, then we'll sit down and talk about, do we want to make that a longer term agreement? And then let me really go to work for you versus just start opening that door for you type of relationship. So we're going to see a shift in that. But I hear a lot of consumers on the buy side being like, what? I got to sign something? Go see how who's going to make me do that? Right.
Mhm.
And so, and then there's the question of what happens on open houses and those type of sign calls type of things. Can an agent show that property without a written agreement if it's enough? It is still up for discussion on those type of scenarios of like a sign call.
Mhm.
Can you see
Open
this
house
house?
walk-in.
Open house walk-in. There's not a
If
lot
you're
of
the
clarity.
listing agent.
If you're the listing agent.
Right.
That's
But
the difference.
if you're
Curtis, will you show me
right.
Angela's listing? That's different. You need a
That's
signed
different.
agreement.
Right.
Angela, I'm driving by your house. I'd like to see it. Can you show it to me today at 6?
Well, how is that different? What if they turn into a dual agency
You have to have that
That has
conversation,
to happen
then
right
establish agency and
right away.
establish
before you show?
compensation.
Established
Not-
agency
not-
and probably dual
Yeah.
agency at that
Yes.
moment, exact moment.
Yes.
In the open house, we're
And
getting
then you have to go back to your seller and see if they
Correct.
allow dual agency.
And here's a new little.
So we didn't
twist.
get that at the listing appointment?
You should have the conversation, but
Yes.
some people, some sellers, pros and cons to it, right?
Right.
Correct.
So
Right.
some sellers are yay and some are nay.
Mhm. So there's still kind of a little not so much
I have
clear
another question.
around that, but the general consensus is that a signed call to the listing agent or an open house type thing, that you can do the activity without a signed agreement because you're a fiduciary to the seller.
Mhm.
And so you are accommodating an unrepresented buyer to see the property. And at that point in time, you'll then establish whether they want to be represented.
This is
Talk to your
potentially
clients.
where you
Yeah.
really have to rely
Right.
on your team.
Yes.
To help you. We might be employing our teammates to come in and act as agent
Yes.
for. And by when we say sign call, we mean our name and number is on the sign, the for sale sign that's in the front yard of somebody selling
Or
a
your
house.
website hit.
Or your website, yeah.
Videos.
Yeah.
Any signage that's out there that has our name and number, if we go to list a house, we get unrepresented buyers calling us to look at that house. So that's why there's a lot of questions swirling around that.
Correct.
And unrepresented buyers coming into open houses.
Right.
I'm just looking. Actually, I'm
Right.
not just looking. I really like this. Can I write a contract? Can you write it for me? And then you become an agent to them. So
Correct.
a lot of questions.
And this is where I've always scratched my head on the whole theory of changing this whole thing like it's changed is supposed to, quote, drive sellers' commissions down. And to me, I'm seeing it's a lot more work now because you are going to have those certain sellers that don't want to offer compensation to see if they can possibly have savings on their end. And so think about logistically what that means for your listing agent. If now, in addition to we're having to spend man hours a day exposing you, getting your property seen, fielding phone calls, scheduling open houses, writing content, filming videos, all these things that take time out of our day to get a house sold, chasing feedback, receiving some offers, negotiating offers, like all that's going on. And then in addition, now the 15 or 20 typical buyers that were calling on the house to come see it through their agent, who was bringing their agent, now 7 or 8 of them are going, hey, I haven't committed to anybody yet because I don't know if I want to pay, so I'm unrepresented. Can you just show me the house? So now what we used to call was like listing accompanied on the very luxury type listings you would as an agent, because that compensation was there built into the price tag of a luxury commission, you would just know it's going to take me a lot more time and energy and effort to sell this house. That's why I'm charging X for it. Because whether they had an agent or not, I'm going to choose to be there at every appointment that I can so that I can really showcase the house myself, right? That's what a listing agent, a company appointment was. And they're rare. They're rare because it logistically is really hard. If you think about when you call as a buyer and say, hey, I want to see this house, and it's listing agent and company, we're always like, oh, hang on, I got to call you back. Because I got to call the listing agent number one and see when they're available. And then they got to call their seller and see when their seller is available. And then I got to check my schedule and make sure I'm available at the same time that the listing agent is available and that the seller is. And then you got to be available for that time too. So that's 4 different parties that have to coordinate a time and a schedule for that house to be shown, which can be really challenging to do. So it's a lot more effort to make those appointments count. So to me, it's almost kind of like we're going into that as a listing agent now, regardless if there's an agent or not. A lot of times there's not going to be an agent. So the onus and the work is going to roll back down to me to then have to figure out how can I get over there at this time, this day, and meet this buyer and show this buyer the house. So likely, with that in mind, we're going to keep that in mind with our listing side commission. Won't necessarily be saving a whole lot of money, because if you're taking my entire sales force away of all the buyer agents in town and you're leaving me to be a one-man show to try to sell your house, number one, it's probably going to take longer. And number two, it's going to cost me more time and money. So that has to be passed through to the consumer.
Okay, my question is, sometimes we as a team, we get that whole like, I have a buyer, but I'm not available. Can you please show my buyer the property? Does that mean now I have to work out a separate agreement again just because I'm the agent showing your buyer? I mean, I know, do you have the agency? Like, how is this working? Or is that like a part of it?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, Angela. I would think not, as long as there's a buyer agency agreement established with the agent that you're helping. Now, if you start to write the contract for that agent,
right,
then we would probably add you on as another designated agent.
Or even vice versa. If you're the listing agent and you're super busy, and now you're like, Angela, you're not busy. Can you please go open that door?
That is different. Now we need an agency relationship with that buyer.
Okay.
And a compensation agreement with that buyer. Because you personally are not representing the seller, only I am.
Right.
So that's different.
Something else to consider, talking about what you were just talking about with having a lot of unrepresented buyers calling you to show your listed house, is if you have an open house. So during my open houses, I'm constantly scanning and having conversations with people to see how solid they are as a buyer, to see how interested they are in a home. And I'm talking 50 conversations sometimes during the open house. If there are now unrepresented buyers that are coming through that want to have that conversation, it is a completely different conversation than the ones that are there that already have a buyer's agency, that already have funding in place, and that are willing to go. A lot of times, the unrepresented buyers will take a lot of your time during that open house and not leave you as much time with the actual buyers who are pre-approved and have an agent and are ready to write in a contract. So there's all these different elements when you're at an open house for your listing.
And I've heard that topic be discussed, and it's been discussed that perhaps it would be in the best interest of everyone to maybe have a little disclaimer at your open house that says, I jokingly have called it in the past, like your Miranda rights. So basically, as a consumer, you're coming in the door. We don't have an agency relationship yet. I represent the seller, which is the way it's been anyway. But we represent the seller at an open house. So when you come in, at this point, our fiduciary duty is to gather as much information that is going to give the seller an advantage. So as a buyer being unrepresented coming into an open house, the more you blab and talk about and tell us, that should be carried on and given to the seller, or even a look in our head about helping the seller to be able to accommodate getting the most money or the most favorable terms, right? So as a buyer, the Miranda rights might be on a little sign like, just remember, I'm a fiduciary of the seller, and anything you say can and will be potentially used against you in negotiations. I mean, we don't have to say that exactly, but that's jokingly what it is. Miranda rights.
Just tell them anything.
Yeah.
When they go, I can't be there.
And then, like we said earlier, there's nothing to say that if once they decide they like the house, then we have this conversation from the open house. And here's the different ways I can work for you to be unrepresented. I can work for you on my own listing as a dual agent if my seller agrees, or potentially I can flip to a transaction broker for all parties. Can't do transaction broker for one and a fiduciary for the other. So then all parties would have to agree, which I don't think a lot of sellers, I don't think a lot of sellers are going to be keen to. Wait a minute. Now you don't have any duties to me whatsoever. Like, I think dual agency.
And then flipping in the middle. I mean, you've already done the work. You've already put marketing, photos.
Well, the price doesn't change, right? You're just saying.
You're just
now
saying
that I'm working with this other party, I'm not going to owe anybody any fiduciary duties as a transaction broker. I'm just shuffling paper. After you've already established this relationship with us, I think that one's going to be a little tougher to swallow, probably than dual agency would be. But those are your options as a buyer walking into an open house or something like that. If that answers somebody's question. Any other, let me talk amongst yourselves if I'm not thinking of something. Let's see.
I think more right now, what will be very beneficial is having buyer consults.
Yes.
Happy hours, or, just having it like maybe once or twice a month.
Yes.
It'd be good to have that sort of event. We should be doing that, but now never.
So here's the types of compensation available for buyer brokers that will continue to take shape. It can be a fixed fee commission that is paid directly by the consumer. So $5,000, $10,000, whatever, you can do that. Or so much retainer, you can collect a retainer. You can do a X amount of dollars for every house I show you type thing. Like it's unlimited what you can do with that. So fixed fee paid directly by the consumer, concession from the seller, not commission from the seller, concession from the seller. Well, it goes back to the other one, it's fine. Concession meaning buyer, I'm going to pay your closing costs, points, all that stuff. And then a portion of the listings broker compensation, which in essence is by the seller. Because the seller is paying the listing broker is paying the buyer broker is paying the buyer agent. So all of those ways are still available. The only difference is it can't be advertised anymore. And agents cannot which drives me crazy because I literally just saw a reel up from somebody that I was like, is your head in the sand or what? You cannot say buyer representation is free because it is not. It never has been.
It's never been free.
It's never been free. It's in the price of your house. It's been paid by somebody. It's never been free. So that language has to go bye-bye. And what should listing brokers advise their clients about the prohibition? Yeah, that's right. Thinking of drinking. I need a drink after this topic. About the prohibition of offers of compensation on the MLS. So listing brokers should inform their clients that offers of compensation would no longer be an option on the MLS. Still an option to pay, not an option to have it on the MLS. This change will not prevent offers of cooperative compensation on an MLS. Will not prevent offers of cooperative compensation, off an MLS. And it will not prevent sellers from offering buyer concessions on an MLS, example, concession for buyer's closing costs. Compensation would continue to be negotiable and should always be negotiated between agent and consumer as they always were. Attorneys. Sorry.
Okay, but let's talk about that though,
Mhm.
because we were talking a little bit about this earlier, that there used to be a field in the MLS that the agents could see where the listing agent would take a percentage and offer it to the buyer's agent as their commission if they wrote a contract on that house and it went through. Now that field in the MLS is going away, which nobody could see anyways besides the agents. So it's kind of hard to explain that. But we can, in the marketing remarks that everyone can see, which is 5-bedroom, 5-bath, awesome atrium ranch in Wildwood or wherever the case may be, you can say seller offering blank concessions.
Towards buyers' blanks.
Towards buyers.
Can't say commission. You can't.
It's the total
Yes.
opposite of what they're
Right. So it has to be
Yes.
specific towards buyer's blank, or can it just
Yes,
be
concession.
okay?
Concession.
Must
It has to say towards buyers.
Well, buyers,
Closing.
concession to buyers and the amount of blank.
Concession
Okay,
to
but-
buyers and the amount of blank.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's just putting it in
Just
a
a
different
loophole.
box.
Right, it's like,
Right,
right,
so
so now it's like,
it will be
Why don't they
Yeah.
just change the field to concessions, yes or no?
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't-
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point is they don't
No,
want.
but still, we still could put it
Yes.
publicly
But
now
now
than
you
it
put it
was
publicly.
before.
I guess more
And like Curtis,
transparency.
you were talking before we started the cameras rolling. You were saying this kind of it's almost like a scary, slippery slope for fair housing a little bit too, because the argument all along against this whole case has been it's going to put the people that need the most help and have the least amount of funds available into a situation where they feel like they can't afford to have an agent, right? And so that is something that we're hoping there's going to be some alternatives that come out that support that class of people so that it's not just the wild, wild west for buyers that can't afford to take the risk that I find a house that isn't going to pay my realtor. But here's the thing. You can always not
Just
go look
don't
at that
offer
house.
on it. Yeah.
You can always
don't.
not go look at that house. You can always not make an offer on that house too. So you don't have to feel stuck because you're in an agreement with an agent. It's still beneficial. We still are going to provide so much value that puts money in your pocket time and time again, as both a seller and a buyer, that more than makes up for
At the end of the
what
day,
you're
it's
paying
still
for
an
it.
investment. So
That's
you don't
right.
want to just,
That's right.
throw your money into whatever.
And then the enforcing governing body of all this is the MLS. So the MLS is going to crack down big time if there's any type of trickiness that's trying to happen, like there's jokes and gifts going around of disguising 3% into
Like Taylor
decode.
Swift does.
Yeah.
offer 3%
Totally.
milk and cookies.
Yes, yes, exactly. It's like milk and cookies.
Totally.
But there's still questions every single time I get into a room and talk with agents. There's still questions. But can we put what the seller will pay in this, can we put that? It's like, no, it's nowhere in the MLS. Every entry in the MLS is a field. And it says it cannot be in any fields in any shape or
Just
form.
be a different auto email now. We're gonna filter concessions, right?
Well, good
From
luck
marketing
searching for that.
But if it's in the
Yes,
marketing remarks,
it's going to take,
then we can
if
say
it's in the marketing remarks, but sometimes
concessions.
they might have it in the agent remarks. They might have, who knows? So it is going to take a lot more time and effort to weed out. And again, we're not saying filter or weed to take them away from our buyer and not
No, you just
expose them
have
to our
two
buyer.
different ones.
We've got to be able to show our buyer, here's the ones where you're covered, here's the ones where you're not.
Right.
They're
What
trying
do you
figure
want to
out
see?
their
Because
finances.
they
Yeah.
need to know how much they're going to possibly be on the hook to come out of pocket to buy which house.
Right.
So it does feel like, again, like you had said earlier, almost like it's the opposite of what the whole suit was supposed to be about and try to do.
Exactly.
It is the opposite.
It does feel that way. So, it's a whole new world. So I don't know. We're gonna work through it. Whole new world. The other question was, does it affect commercial transactions? And no, it does not affect commercial transactions. Because usually those are not realtors involved with commercial. Let's see. Is there anything else I'm missing? No, I think that was the main crux of it. So any closing thoughts, guys?
Get your team in place.
How do you think it'll
Amen.
shake out? Do you think most sellers will continue?
Based on other areas that have gone before us, I do. I do personally think we're going to go through a bumpy period of people trying to test the water. And we've already heard, like I said, I've had some agents call me in the last couple of weeks, being like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say. The sellers, bringing this up, bringing that up. So they're hearing it. They're going to have some sellers that want to do that. We've talked about potentially some builders are going to take away compensations or reduce that. So that's a whole other thing, I think we're going to see people test the market, and then we're going to see what happens with those listings. And then comps are going to become a lot more complicated later, like you were talking about what was involved with commission or not, because even what looks to be in the multiple listing service or whatever is somebody that's not factoring in a compensation, we don't know what happened at the negotiation table. We don't know.
How are you going to search?
So you don't know which ones paid commissions and which ones didn't pay commissions. So it's just going to start being sale price, whether there was a commission involved or not.
Melanie hit the nail right on the head, though, when she said these buyers consultations, because if you try to get somebody
100%.
at a house and give them that kind of information, it's just never going to happen. They're going to be too distracted.
Will there be more
Going
Going through the first contract, when you have had a good buyer's consultation and they are somewhat understanding the process, and then when you write your first contract, even though you've described some things that we're going to discuss, it is still really tricky that first time out.
information.
Yeah, and so it's going to be.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think as buyer's agent everywhere, that we need to get comfortable and confident to talk about this. Because I feel like just coming,
Amen.
everyone is always so nervous. Well, I don't know if
Yeah,
I
how it
want
used to be.
Yes.
But wait a second, I'm in this as a business. I
Right.
consider myself as an entity is a business.
Right.
And as a business,
You're
I
not
need to,
non-for-profit
right.
organizations.
And I need to be able to get confident of whether I have to practice it and say it again or have these like social moments. Find your niche, other realtors, buyer agents, to say this the proper way.
But go back and think to when you first started and
Yes.
you were like, oh, I'll show you. And then you realize
You get
the
desperate.
enormous amount of time that it takes to work with buyers who are not committed to you, who could easily end up writing a contract with any other agent, anytime, any place. And you've already showed them 10 to 20 houses, not going to your kid's soccer game or
I
missing
hate to
out
be
on
devil's
dinner.
advocate, but I'm like,
Yeah.
let's go take speech classes. I took speech classes in high school.
Yes.
I'm all about debate, and I
Yes.
feel like as a businesswoman and
Yes.
entrepreneur, which is who I believe I am,
Mhm.
we can laugh and socialize, but then at the end of the day, I'm going to say, great, I want to show you this house. So I need to go over this
I want to
contract.
get paid for my job.
Busy, successful
And-
agents literally don't have the time
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, and
So-
we've got to be willing to walk away from somebody that
Yeah.
That's not
that
It has
cooperate
to,
with
it
our
has to be like
restrictions
having your boundaries
and
set.
cooperate with our
I mean,
time.
I talk about this with my children too. I'm like, find your voice. Do you just let someone walk in and make you uncomfortable, or you really wanted to? You really wanted something and you didn't speak up.
Yeah.
I'm like always talking, and I teach children dance too, and I'm always saying this, you guys. We have intent when we're doing something. This is not just in the dance, but in your life. Okay, so speak with it,
But
walk with
you
it.
do
talk
need to
with it.
find an agent
You do.
that is doing all of these things to give you the best experience, because there are unfortunately subpar agents out there that
So maybe it's to
aren't worth their value. So that's where we have to establish our own value. We know what we're worth. We know how many deals we've saved. We know how many deals we've negotiated tens of thousands of dollars off. We know how many deals that we had to come in and do something on the appraisal or pick it back up out of the ashes and put it back together. And all of that is value. And so the more you're able to articulate that,
Yes.
it's our responsibility to articulate that to the buyer, because you guys don't know what all we do. And when Zillow then came to the scene, it sounds like we do a lot less than we do. And like I've said before in the past, we've added to that by just bragging about all of our sales and not really talking about the 4 freaking years that this woman has put people in a car and taken them to see houses and never has been paid a dime. You know, we still haven't. Well, and we sat with people last night that, had we not been creative and have enough experience and strategic, this offer that we're crafting for these people are so out of the box that it would never have flown normally. But because of the expertise and care and the knowledge of us as a group,
And the listing agent.
and the listing agent and the consumer of sitting down, like we've really crafted a really crazy offer that's being considered, you know, at this point. And so that's the value. And that's where, as agents, we have to be able to articulate. As buyers, you have to just give us your time. Please give us your time. That's where I'm going to close, to have a consultation and sit down with us so that we can show you all the things that we can do for you to get you in the most expensive investment in your life with as little amount of stress and as little amount of money out of pocket as we possibly can, and just get you into your dream house. That's the goal.
It's not
So-
just
expect to be moved.
Expect to be moved. That's right.
It's not about concessions. It's not about opening a door.
No.
There's a lot more
It's
to
a
it.
lot more to it. And sit down with us and we will show you what all that is. That's
This team right here is fabulous, by the way. 5 stars.
I think so. Anything else in closing, guys?
I think we're good.
That's good.
All right. Expect to be moved.